I was very surprised to see that one of the most popular decks on Dreamborn Inc. is my Emerald Sapphire mid-range aggro deck. This deck was decent enough. The video for this deck list is linked in the description where we showcase it in some matches, but it was kind of an experimental build where we focused on maxing out our drops on 5 ink, and we just focused heavily on character drops, maintaining a lot of pressure, and replenishing our hand via the Popsicle draw engine. In this video, we're going to take a look at what I think is a better deck list, and it's cheaper. So as of me making this video, this deck only costs around $137, which is pretty good. But before I get into the breakdown, I just want to know in the comment section below if you've tried this deck out, either the first iteration of what I posted on that first video, or if you've modified it. And why I'm making this update is because I did notice when I was testing it that you do struggle with removal, and if the opponent does put up a threatening board and you can't aggro your way through it, you basically lose. And some people mention that, you know, maybe you should try to throw in some Let It Go since you have the draw power, you can likely keep one in the back. And I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? Why not just have the utility? I don't need to go full on 100% aggro. And so you see the deck list here, we've added in some interesting tempo control cards. Let It Go helps us deal with the threat. Ring the Bell allows us to crash one of our smaller characters, put a piece of damage onto a big threat, and then ring the bell it away. Bounce allows us to not only recycle and re-ready cards potentially, like we can quest with Kuzco, bounce it back to hand, and as well bounce an opponent's threat back to hand. But Bippity Boppity Boo also allows us to recycle cards, and in this case, you can recycle things like the Mickey for an extra ink, the Flavorshim for an extra item banish and draw 2, a Nick Wild for an extra Popsicle, or just redrop your Kuzco, Pete, or Cogsworth just to keep them readied up from questing earlier. So interesting tech cards, and I'm only running two of each of them because you don't want to see them early game, you definitely want to see them later game. Aside from that, our item package is more or less the same, and we've also slightly changed up our character drops. Instead of running Cheshire Cat, we've opted for the Caterpillar, just a badass card overall, excuse my language there, but also a quest for 3 instead of 2, even though it doesn't have the effect that it banishes the challenging character on it. But that's fine, because again, we're aggroing and we're replacing our hand. Obviously, we've added in the Pete and the Cogsworth. These are essentially the main reasons for the change and the update in the deck list. While I do like the Bell and the Ray, they are susceptible to non-challenging removal, whereas Pete and Cogsworth really aren't, except for a Lady Tremaine or a Be Prepared. These are the only ways to remove warded characters by your opponent forcibly, and Lady Tremaine still has a condition under it. But if you're ramping up with this deck, as explained in the previous video, especially if you get your Mickey on turn 3, you skip the turn 4 drop and you can go straight to turn 5, and dropping a warded character that quests for 3 or more on turn 4 is absolutely crazy, especially when you can ready it back up on turn 5 after you've quested with it, and then you can bounce it back to your hand and replay it, etc. It allows you to get very, very far ahead very quickly and put a lot of pressure onto your opponent. So that's the deck list, pretty nice and condensed. Let's go ahead and take a look at some matches with the new version of the deck. In this first matchup here, we are going first, which is always great in a deck that wants to control tempo. And what we do for our mulligan is just send back the uninkable Bippity Boppity Boo, because like I mentioned in the deck list portion, you want to see that card later on in the game, and it doesn't really serve any purpose earlier on. Only under very niche circumstances will it serve a purpose, so usually you just want to put those back if you do have them. So turn 1 we drop Scepter, and then turn 2 we draw into Popsicle, which is what we would have liked to play turn 1 like our opponent did, but it's totally fine. I've actually cut out the Flynn Riders from my build. You probably didn't notice them in the deck list prior, and because when I was testing it, I just found Flynn, the discard, not really relevant, especially with the Popsicle engine running around everywhere. Unless you're a dedicated discard deck, I think Flynn Rider is kind of lost in terms of utility. So I would just go with Enchantress and Noi myself now. But obviously in this video, I'm using the Flynn Rider. Now, again, like I mentioned, you want to play on curve the best you can. Unfortunately, we're going to ink our Pete here, and on the 4 drop, we are going to go ahead and play the Flavorshim. And what's nice is we have Popsicle and Nick Wild in hand, so we can get amazing utility next turn. We quest for a bunch. We're up to 7 now. The opponent is trying to set up some kind of game plan here, but their deck is just too slow to deal with this aggro deck. And once we get to the mid-range portion, they're not on Ruby, which means they're not on Be Prepared. Good luck dealing with my warded characters when they drop, especially when I get an Eye of the Fates, which again, off of the Flavor Shroom here, I'm going to be able to draw just a ton of cards. Don't even need to ring the bell. The opponent cannot deal with my deck fast enough. We draw into the Eye of the Fates there. I think I go for the Nick here. Yeah, just put more pressure on board. The opponent realizes that they can't deal with it despite having all those cards in their hand. We're up to 13 already, and like the game is over. Let's go ahead and look at match number 2. So in this matchup here, I am using the updated deck list, which was reflected in the graphic from earlier, showing you all the cards. And this one is without Flynn Rider. We are going first, which is nice, and I will have a going second match next, so stay tuned for that. The reason I'm including this one though is because this was against a purple steel deck, or an amethyst steel, which is, from what I've seen, one of the harder matchups for this deck, because the Mim cards trade favorably into your cards, which means that they're able to survive and bounce themselves back to save themselves from things like Ring the Bell, and they just out your cards, so they maintain their card advantage while just outing your board. And usually your Hiram engine isn't enough to stay on top of it, because you lose tempo when things like this happen. The Mim takes out a card, they still have their Mim, and they can just bounce it back if you can't take it out in order to just recycle it over and over again. So they just kind of get infinite advantage. And this is where the Amethyst Mim package is very strong against aggro decks, because they just generate advantage and you usually won't be able to aggro them out. Paired with Steel, they can also take out your aggro threats with things like Grab Your Swords and whatnot, right? So that's why this matchup is pretty tough. And the mill version, you don't even lose to the mill factor, you lose to the fact that they just have steel cards sometimes. But again, you can play around it to a certain extent, and you see me here almost ink the Cogsworth, and then I'm thinking to myself, hold on a second, if they're on Amethyst Steel, maybe the Cogsworth has a lot of value here. In hindsight, I probably should not have inked that Pete and just stayed on 5 ink, and the game plan being drop my double Cogsworth. The opponent ends up going to time here thinking what to do, and they just end up not questing because they're afraid of the resistibility, challenging into their stuff and taking it out for free. And we drop a second Cogsworth, so now the opponent is even in a worse situation, because essentially anything they challenge into me right now at most will just do 1 to 2 damage, that being either the Goat, the Mim Fox, or the Mim Snake. So the Cogsworth is putting in a lot of work here by keeping all of my cards alive on board if I quest with them. I'm playing very passively, and so is the opponent, because we want to see who's going to exert first. The opponent opts to quest with the Goat and then with the Arthur to bounce back the Goat, so that is a nice interaction where they just gain a ton of lore. And then they end up replaying the Mim Fox in order to bounce their Arthur back. So they're really valuing not leaving anything exerted for my characters to challenge and take out, because again, into Arthur, like, I would take no damage, right? It only does 1. They Yzma back their own Snake, which tells me they're pretty desperate for an answer to our board here, and I can easily just rack up a ton of lore next turn. The opponent ends up timing out on their turn, just again thinking too much, and we drop Scepter, which is a good top deck. We quest with Hiram to banish the Scepter and draw 2. Now we have a Let It Go and Annoy, which is even more powerful. The ward ability here is coming in super clutch. Even a Grab Your Swords here wouldn't really do all that much, and we don't have to worry about a shifted Tinkerbell. We drop another Cusco here, and we have 12 lore on board. The opponent, after thinking for a very long time, just ends up giving me the GGs and resigning, because even if they took out the Hiram and the Mickey, we still have quest for 10, so they have to take out one of the Cuscos, which lose some board's presence, and there's just no real way for them to come back with Amethyst Steel at this point with this board. So Cogsworth, MVP of this match. Alright, in this final match here, it was a bit of a long one, so if you want to see how the grind game plays out, make sure you stay tuned into this match here. In this one, we're inking our Cogsworth, and I think this was, again, still when I was on the Flynn Rider build, but again, it's not really of much consequence. So to start off, we want to opt to play the Noi here, which is kind of risky because we don't have an item to protect it, but I ended up cutting out the opponent's inking actions for some reason, because when I edit my videos on my timeline, I just look for any areas where there's not any like audio spikes so when it's just like flat audio, and I just cut those out because those are like wait times. Unfortunately, when the opponent was inking in this match, it didn't make any noise, so I cut out most of their inks, and this opponent was taking a long time for their turns, so they would like wait, ink something, wait, and then play something. So I ended up cutting out what they inked, but I think I catch a few. They are on Ruby Amethyst though, which is interesting here, and once again utilizing those Mim cards. Because of the Maleficent on field, I didn't want to quest with my Noi specifically playing into exactly this play in the Madam Mim Fox. So you see that I kept everything ready, no one's quested, no one's challenged anything, and I'm just building up a board here waiting to see what the opponent is going to do. They opt to play the rabbits, and they have a lot of cards in hand, but we do have our Hiram that can come down and draw some cards. The awkward play of Bippity Boppity Booing our own Mickey so that we can redrop it and gain ink is one of those awkward plays I was talking about in the beginning, where you usually don't want to do that unless you're kind of in an awkward situation. And right now, because I'm in a weird situation on board in terms of the Madam Mim Fox, I'm going to go ahead and opt to use that Bippity Boppity Boo there. Now in this scenario, I'm just like, at this point, I have enough cards with the Hiram that I'm pretty confident that I can just keep questing now. And if the opponent starts to out my threats, the Hiram should have drawn me 4 cards, because it should live this turn unless the opponent's on Dragonfire, which is very unlikely. And I should have enough cards to just replenish the board with threats, and you know, my cards quest for more than theirs do, so the logic there is I'll just outquest you. So again, going back to that strategy of just being super aggro, and even though the opponent's building a board, my threats just quest for more, and they're just more powerful here. So again, knowing that the opponent is on Ruby Amethyst, I do have to be wary of that 7 ink mark and the dropping of the Be Prepared. So I make a little bit again of an awkward play here. Knowing when to drop Eye of the Fates versus not is kind of weird. So I end up dropping Nick, opting to take back the Popsicle, and then I drop the Eye of the Fates in order to quest with Mickey and give my Noi resist and ward. So the opponent ends up dropping Maui, and I'm like, oh, that's really good in this situation. And now their board is looking kind of threatening. Again, they're only questing for 4. We're already at 11. And so after a bit of a grind game here, we're now up to 8 ink. We have a lot of cards in hand. The opponent is going to either let us quest for 3 and go to 14 if they don't be prepared, and you know, I guess they can't because they played the Maui. But next turn, we are going to be threatening pretty heavily to end the game very, very soon. So I end up dropping Cusco here, I think, in an effort to try to force out the Be Prepared. And then I drop Double Scepter. Maybe I should have dropped the Noi, because if they had a Lady Tremaine, they could Maui into the Nick and then Lady Tremaine away my Cusco, which would be really bad. I actually think that's what they do here. Yeah, it is. So that's why I should have played the Noi. I literally, okay. Yeah, so perfect example. But now this looks like a really bad situation. The opponent is only on 1 lore. We do have a Hiram in hand that can draw us cards. And again, we have an Eye of the Fates, which makes our Hiram quest for 2 instead of 1. It makes our Noi quest for 3 instead of 2, etc. So we're not necessarily in too much of a dire strait. But again, we're always functioning under the anticipation that the opponent has the Be Prepared, right? And so a little bit of a waiting game happens here, and the board state eventually evolves into this, and the opponent does indeed have the Be Prepared. But again, we're on 17 lore, and with double Eye of the Fates, because I had that drawn from a couple turns ago, I ended up playing it out. I pretty much have game here. So I drop the Noi, which again has ward, so it plays around Maleficent. They have to be prepared. And I don't know why I end up dropping Enchantress here. I think maybe to play around another Lady Tremaine. So sure enough, they do have the Be Prepared, and I'm like, okay, that's totally fine still. They drop double Olaf, so revealing what they're holding in their hand there. And these Olafs can still close out the game for them, so it's not over by any means. We're going to go ahead, though, and drop Pete and a Caterpillar, most likely. Yeah, because again, we're going to say you either have to be prepared to win the game. A Lady Tremaine won't do it, and neither will a Maleficent, and that's again the power of these warded characters, being able to close out the game when you need to. Pete will quest for 4, Caterpillar will quest for 5 because of the Eye of the Fates, and I think the opponent realizes after they drew with Merlin that they can't out this board, and therefore on our turn we just show them the sauce. Again, not flexing or anything, just showing them kind of what we were on. They give us the well played, and I think I give them the well played back. That's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Quantum is out.